Well, as Mark said, Green College is my second home. I really love coming back here repeatedly, and it's such a pleasure to be welcomed by Mark and spend time with you, with him, and in the college, with the people who in the college, and to always give this talk, which is always a time in which I try to test out new ideas. I take risks in the hope that I can improve my understanding of very contentious issues. The title, as you can see, it doesn't come from me, it comes from a document that you can see up there. It's a joint hearing in the American Congress in April 2018. It's a bit unclear, but anyway, you can see Scholars or Spies, and the subtitle is, what is it actually? Oops, sorry. Foreign Plots Targeting America's Research and Development. It narrows the issue down to, and it's basically about Chinese people, scholars in the United States, and as being engaged in a plot to target American research and development. The talk is a spin-off because generally historians don't deal with such contemporary issues. It's a spin-off from a book that I'm writing with my colleague and friend Mario Daniels at Georgetown University, in which we study the historical evolution of the measures taken by the American government to control the circulation of knowledge in the name of national security. Our original aim was to end with the Clinton administration. Clinton was heavily attacked for putting business interests ahead of national security. We thought we'd end then roughly around 2000, but of course events have completely overtaken us, and we now have to write an epilogue dealing with current affairs. Mario is going to concentrate more on the corporate side, so if you came to hear a lot about Huawei, I'm going to say just a little about Huawei, but not a lot. I'm going to talk about the academic side and what's going on in American-Chinese relationships. And it's both about research and study. In May 2015, Chao Ching-chi was arrested at gunpoint in front of his family in his home in Philadelphia at 7 o'clock in the morning by the FBI. Chi was charged with sharing proprietary technology with China. He's a naturalized American citizen. He has lived and worked in the USA since 1989. He was interim chair of the physics department at Temple University, and he is a world expert on superconductivity in thin films. The allegations against him centered on his sharing, collaborating with Peking University and Shanghai Institute of Applied Physics, and sharing with them what they said was repeatedly he shared with them proprietary knowledge on something called a pocket heater for producing superconducting films that had been commercialized by a small firm in Texas. He was also accused of lucrative and prestigious appointments in exchange for his assistance in sharing this proprietary knowledge. He faced 80 years in prison and a fine of $1 million. In May 2019, Emory University in Atlanta summarily terminated the employment of 2 researchers in the medical school, Li Chaojing and his wife, Li Shihua. Here they are. The couple were also US citizens of Chinese origin. They'd been employed by Emory for over 20 years and were internationally recognized for their work on using genetically engineered pigs for studying Huntington's disease. The Emory administration closed down their laboratory overnight, told their 4 postgraduate students who were working with them to leave the country within a month. We don't know what happened to the laboratory animals. The argument that was given by Emory University stated officially that the couple, who were named as key personnel on NIH grants, that's the National Institute of Health grants, to Emory University, had failed to fully disclose foreign sources of research funding and the extent of their work for research institutes in China. In June 2019, Bloomberg Businessweek reported that Qifeng Wu, the head of epidemiology at the University of Texas's MD Anderson Cancer Center, had been charged by the FBI of violating confidentiality agreements in reviewing, again, NIH grant applications, and for failing to disclose her paid work in China. She'd published 87 papers with Chinese colleagues and co-authors, and at the instigation of her management, had built up links with 27 Chinese research institutes. To establish their case, the FBI subpoenaed the emails and telephone conversations of several MD Anderson employees. As reported by Bloomberg, Wu hasn't been charged with stealing anyone's ideas, but in effect she stood accused of secretly aiding and abetting cancer research in China. She subsequently resigned her post at MD Anderson. She left her children and with her husband behind in Texas, and she took a job as the Dean of the School of Public Health in Shanghai. So these are just a few examples from a major campaign by the Trump administration to identify and penalize, if necessary, researchers who have received federal support for their research and have gone and shared their results with people in China. There is no doubt that this administration has taken a particularly pugnacious approach to the potential abuses of international scientific collaboration in collaboration with Chinese institutions. And while some condemn him for doing so, I must stress that many people, including people who don't agree with anything that President Trump is doing, totally support his actions in this pugnacious approach to China. Why is he doing it? What are the underlying causes for the increasingly tense relationship between the US and China in the domain of international scientific exchange? I would argue that the range of new measures being adopted to control the circulation in both academic and corporate worlds are responses to what are perceived as a major and unprecedented threat to American national and, above all, economic security. The word economic security is a technical term that I'll explain a little bit later. The emergence of China as an economic, military, and especially scientific and technological power over the last decade or so, coupled with a massive trade deficit in China's favor, is posing a major challenge to America's position in global markets that has been based on scientific and technological achievement. I keep stressing that I'm an historian of science and technology, just remember that. So I emphasize the importance of scientific and technological exchange in this debate and in this argument. Whether or not you agree with President Trump and his responses, the fact of the matter is that any American administration, including those that will come after him, will have to agree that they will have to deal with a major power that has every intention of transforming China into the dominant global manufacturing country on earth by the mid-20th century. And you'll understand why the mid-20th century matters in a moment. This paper offers no solutions. It only highlights the fact that the US and the capitalist West relations with China are now being fundamentally refashioned, and that conflicts and negotiations over the production, the circulation, and the adoption of knowledge, scientific and technology, are at the heart of the struggle for power between them. The values enshrined in the American research system are engaged in that struggle, and they will not emerge unscathed from it. This paper is divided into three main sections. First, I place international scientific and technological collaboration between the US and China in historical perspective, pinpointing the benefits and the risks it poses to the United States. Second, I zoom in on the risks, and I highlight in particular US anxiety about a key program that the Chinese promote actively, the so-called 1,000 Talents program. And this linkage of 1,000 Talents to a program called Made in China 2025. This Made in China 2025 plan is absolutely crucial for understanding why the United States is so anxious about what's happening in these exchanges. This plan is central to the determination by Chinese leaders to displace the United States as world economic leader by 2049. 2049 is, of course, 100 years of the foundation of the PRC. And whenever I speak of China, I mean, of course, the People's Republic of China. As such, it challenges America's economic security head-on. I conclude with an analysis of the concept of economic security that actually emerged in the 80s and early 90s in face of the threat from Japan to the American economic strength. The protectionist measures being taken by Trump to control the circulation of advanced knowledge cannot be simply understood as a trade war with China. There's much more than a trade war with China. There is a determination to defend American economic security, American economic competitiveness in the global marketplace, and with it, of course, American global power. It has always been based on American scientific and technological preeminence, at least ever since the end of World War II. So a few things let me just talk a bit about international collaboration with China and how it's kind of gone awry over the last 5 years. Ever since relations between Washington and Beijing were normalized formally in 1979, the United States has welcomed students from China and scholars from China on American soil. The striking feature about these relationships, though, is the increase in the last 2 decades in the number and quality of Chinese students in American universities. That has grown exponentially in line with Chinese investment in research and development, and their political commitment in China to building an educated domestic science and engineering workforce. In this graph, you can see some data on R&D. It's not very clear, but the line at the bottom is Chinese investment in R&D. The line at the top is American investment in R&D as percentage of GDP. And in between, you have the OECD. And you can see the massive surge in Chinese investment in R&D beginning in the year 2000. In 2000, China only invested 0.89% of its GDP in research and development. This has climbed steadily until today. It is about 2.13% of its GDP is invested in research and development, compared to the United States as 2.79. So China has caught up massively in investing in research and development funding. At the same time, the number of Chinese students has grown enormously in science and engineering, degrees taking PhDs in the United States. In the first 10 or 15 years of the year 2000, 4,000 Chinese students a year graduated with PhDs in science and engineering in the United States. Last 2 years, 5,500 a year graduated with PhDs in science and engineering in the United States. The current administration is fully aware of the value of these students. By the way, there are 380,000 Chinese students in the United States at the moment. Undergraduate and graduate students in the United States, 380,000. As the FBI's W. Priestap pointed out to a Congressional Subcommittee in June 2018, of the total of 1.4 million, there's 1.4 million international students in the United States, about 380,000 are Chinese, that they entail both enormous benefit for the United States and substantial risk. This is the FBI talking a couple of years ago. He noted that the vast majority of these international scholars posed no threat to their host institutions. In 2017, these international students contributed $37 billion to the United States economy and created over 450,000 jobs. They also brought, said Priestap, the FBI, a diversity of ideas, new expertise, know-how, and especially in underrepresented fields in the United States like science, engineering, and mathematics. And of course, he added opportunities for cross-cultural exchange. Immigrants, he pointed out, speaking to Congress, had founded almost a quarter of new US businesses, nearly 1/3 of American venture-backed companies, and half of Silicon Valley's high-tech startups, all thanks to immigrants. A more prosaic argument for welcoming students from abroad was made by Congresswoman Eddie Bernice-Johnson of Texas. She noted that international students pay full fees at American public universities and in that way compensated for the lack of state funding in some American schools. So that's a more prosaic argument for saying we really need foreign students in the United States. For many years, this was a positive thing, and it was regarded as an extremely valuable thing for both sides, China and the United States. This is no longer so. There are increasingly voluble criticisms in Congress and in the Trump administration of abusive practices by scientists, by students and researchers from China who study and work in the US. A congressional hearing, the one you saw in my title slide, in April 2018, phrased the issue in stark terms. Reducing the roles of international students, and notably Chinese researchers in the United States, to being either scholars or spies, the hearing was established, and I quote, to explore foreign nations' exploitation of US academic institutions for the purpose of accessing and engaging in the exfiltration of valuable science and technology. Exfiltration is a word they made up, excuse me, I have a cold, as the other side of infiltration. It has the same connotations. The devious, nefarious extraction of information out of the university system for Chinese advantage. Along with these suspicions, various executive agencies, especially the National Institute of Health, have launched a major inquiry into the practices of researchers who receive federal funding from the government for medical research and who collaborate extensively with colleagues in China. They are particularly concerned about the transnational circulation of knowledge and know-how in China's 1,000 Talents program. Indeed, it is no coincidence that all of the people whom I mentioned in my 3 little vignettes at the beginning have worked on the 1,000 Talents program with colleagues in China. And these talents programs are a key target of the American administration at the moment. Why is the Trump administration so concerned? So let me first just give you information from the Chinese website on what the 1,000 Talents program does. Oops. China initiated the recruitment program for global experts, known as the 1,000 Talents Plan or Program, at the end of 2008. This is the official website. It would bring in overseas top talents to China over the next 5 to 10 years, relying on national key innovation projects, national key disciplines and national key laboratories, central state-owned enterprises and state-owned commercial and financial institutions, as well as various industrial parks, namely the high-tech development parks. If you've been to Shenzhen, just across the border from Hong Kong, you know what a high-tech development park is. This plan called for strategic scientists or leading talents who can make breakthroughs in key technologies, who can enhance China's high-tech industries and emerging disciplines. By the end of May 2014, almost 4,200 overseas high-level talents had been introduced to the 1,000 Talents Plan in 10 calls for proposals. The recruits sought scholars who were established, young professionals, or top-notch talents and teams for short-term, long-term, or entrepreneurial fellowships, varying from 3 to 5 years. They wanted Nobel Prize winners, they wanted distinguished faculty members, they even wanted young, dynamic scholars from prestigious universities. They paid them a large number of benefits, education, housing, startup funds of 1 million RMB if you were a senior faculty member to stay in China if you signed a contract for 5 years. 1 million RMB is about $150,000. If you were not a senior faculty member, you get startup funds of about $75,000. The 1,000 Talents program involves far more than what you usually find in international exchange. Highly trained foreign personnel are expected to immerse themselves fully in the Chinese research system, to make their goals its own, and to share every dimension of their experience acquired in their national research systems abroad with their Chinese hosts. Those who devised the program for the government in China show a deep understanding of the range of skills required to build a dynamic research system. They're not simply interested in people with outstanding brains and talents in intellectual kind. They need also people who, as they say, when they go back to China, they're expected to play a positive role in scientific innovation, in technological breakthrough, in discipline construction, in talent training, and high-tech industry development, becoming, they say, an important force in the construction of the innovative country. They're meant to become fully engaged in every dimension of transforming China's innovation system into one that's modeled on the one that they came from. This is, of course, extremely concerning to the present administration. Until recently, participation in the program was an asset. You put it on your CV, you put it in your activity report for your chair. Now nobody does it any longer. And the Chinese themselves are beginning to play down the importance of the program because there's a huge backlash, as I've just implied, against people who take advantage of it coming from the United States or elsewhere. There are two main reasons for this backlash. The first is that this 1,000 Talents program clearly aims to reverse the brain drain from China to the US by attracting highly qualified scientists and engineers who have worked in the United States or elsewhere back to China, if they're going back to China, if they've never been from China, anyway, to attract them to China. This has been a major concern, this brain drain of many nations towards the United States, of course, who have watched in dismay as their trained scientists and engineers emigrated to America, attracted by higher salaries and better resources for research. Like me, by the way. I was attracted from France by better resources for research and a better salary. China's 1,000 Talents program collides head-on with this traditional argument in favor of immigration, that people who come to the United States stay in the United States and contribute to the development of the economy and the research and development system in the United States. China's 1,000 Talents is exactly opposed to that, right? It's trying to get people back to do the same for China as what they did for the United States. In fact, President Trump is so aware of this that at the G20 meeting in Osaka this year, in an aside, he said, and it's typical Trump language, right? We want Chinese students to go to our great schools and great universities. They're great students and tremendous assets. He went so far as to propose a special person's waiver, a smart person's waiver, so they could not only stay but have access to a green card. We want to keep these people here. Xi Jinping wants to keep them there. So you can understand there's a clash. The second major objection to the program is the lack of reciprocity in the transactions between the two countries, which is an essential part of any kind of international exchange system. In one sense, this is only to be expected, and is indicative of the gap between the world's preeminent scientific and technological power, which is the United States, in most fields anyway, and a young Chinese research system. But far more damning than just this lack of reciprocity is the charge that these students and scholars exploit the American open research system for nefarious ends. The director of the FBI, Christopher Wray, recently in his famous, frequently cited speech in New York in 2018, said this about Chinese visitors to the United States. China, he said, has pioneered a societal approach to stealing innovation in any way it can, from a wide array of businesses, universities, and organizations. Everyone was in on it. Chinese intelligence services, its state-owned and ostensibly private enterprises, and 130,000 Chinese graduate students and researchers who work and study in the US every year. Plainly, China seems determined to steal its way up the economic ladder at our expense. Ray's comments were echoed a couple of months later by the FBI's Counterintelligence Strategic Partnership, who said that Chinese talent programs pose a serious threat to American business and universities through economic espionage and the theft of IP. The US National Intelligence Council said the aim of the 1,000 Talents program is to facilitate the legal and illicit transfer of American technology, international property, and know-how to China. The Department of Energy says that such programs take advantage of America's openness to collaboration to infiltrate our labs, steal our technology, and use our resources against us. So there's a really strong pushback by all these branches of administration against Chinese researchers working in the United States on the ground that they're stealing information and knowledge for the benefit of China at the expense of America's open system. And of course that is totally unfair. I'm going to leave aside the question of stealing for the moment, the question of theft. It's a very complex issue, and I'll come to it a bit later. For the moment, I want to stress, though, that in a planned economy, as we have in China, a scheme like 1,000 Talents program is integrated into the overall goals of the Communist Party leadership. It is a planned economy, and they selectively choose people who will meet their goals, as I explained a moment ago. These goals have been spelled out in an ambitious plan, which I mentioned at the beginning, Made in China 2025. That seeks to transform China's manufacturing industry into the most competitive in the world by mid-21st century. This confluence between talent programs and the government's leadership to transform China into the world's dominant manufacturing power by 2049 is of major concern to the Trump administration, and will be of major concern to any administration. So, I mean, whatever you might think about Trump, everyone who comes in his path will be similarly confronted by these concerns. That's from it's not a very helpful picture, but this is from the website of Made in China 2025. It was launched in 2015 with the goal of upgrading China's manufacturing industry. It's an economic program. It's an economic modernization and reform program. It was drafted by the Ministry of Industry and Information Technology. That's important, over 2.5 years, with input from 150 experts from the Chinese Academy of Engineering. It is inspired by Germany's Industry 4.0 plan that seeks to apply the tools of information technology to improve the efficiency and the quality of production. They singled out 10 key sectors which the government seeks to secure a dominant share of the global market by 2049. I list them here. I'm not going to read them. You can just look down them. Information technologies everywhere, numerical control, all the main aerospace, aviation, maritime engineering, railway, energy saving, agricultural machinery, biopharmaceuticals, high-performance medical devices. Very important area for China. I don't know if you know that 80% of the drugs that we get in the United States come from either India or China. So it's a very big area for them. These sectors are central to what is called the Fourth Industrial Revolution, integrating big data, cloud computing, the Internet of Things, and other emerging technologies into a global manufacturing supply chain. Their foci are things like artificial intelligence, robotics, autonomous vehicles, augmented and virtual reality, financial technology, gene editing. They all will be foundational so that many applications and end uses will be built upon them. They are also dual use with applications in both civil and military domains. According to China's State Council, Made in China 2025 sets 3 timelines: 2025, 2035, and 2049. For China to become first a powerful manufacturing country by 25, a middle-level world manufacturing power by 35, and the top world manufacturing power, displacing the United States by 2049. It not only aims for China to become the world leader in cutting-edge high technology sectors, it also aspires to Chinese industry becoming increasingly independent of global supply chains, aiming to raise the domestic content of core components and materials to 40% by 2020 and 70% by 2025. So China can more or less become autonomous and independent of large sectors of the global supply chain system. One expert witness said to Congress that Made in China 2025 is part of President Xi Jinping's ambitious plan to achieve the great rejuvenation of the Chinese nation and restore China to what she believes is the country's rightful place as a great power by 2049, the centennial, of course, of the PRC's founding. The 1,000 Talents program will be integrated into the system, recruiting experts from all over the world to achieve these ambitious goals and to foster emerging technologies in the new manufacturing innovation centers planned by Made in China 2025. There are 15 of these planned for 2020 and another 40 by 2025. So China, these will be cutting-edge manufacturing innovation centers to which people will be attracted to improve the quality and the efficiency of Chinese manufacturing system. The Chinese leadership has the political will, the industrial infrastructure, and highly trained cadre of scientists and engineers to reach these objectives, even though many people think this is hopelessly ambitious. It also has, of course, the financial means derived from its huge, and at least until recently, increasingly favored balance of trade. In 1990, the difference between exports to and imports from China to the US was just $10.4 billion in China's favor. So the balance of trade with China was $10.4 billion negative for the United States. That is in 1990. Today, it is $430 billion. It has climbed steadily over these last 10 or 15 years to $430 billion of trade deficit with China. Faced with these alarming statistics, in August 2017, the US Office of the US Trade Representative launched an official investigation under Section 301 of the Trade Act of 1974, which is an instrument the United States government does to try to force other countries with their trades to bring them in line with American trading practices. In his submission to the hearings, James Lewis, an important think tank in Washington, characterized China's drive to modernize via plans like Made in China 2025 in these terms. Oops, I see my slides are slightly. What is new is that unfair trade, from the American point of view, security and industrial policies, tolerable in a smaller developing country, are now combined with China's immense government-directed investment and regulatory policies to put foreign firms at a disadvantage. China has the wealth, the commercial sophistication, and technological expertise to make its pursuit of technological leadership work. And that's what America is terrified of. America seeks to be and to remain the world's scientific and technological leader. If China displaces it from that pedestal, that is what its concern is. The determination to transform China from a big manufacturing country to a powerful one in global markets threatens to completely reshuffle the distribution of power in the global economy. One study by the US Chamber of Commerce concluded in 2017 that Made in China 2025 aims to lever the power of the state to alter competitive dynamics in a global market in industries that are core to America's economic competitiveness. That's the rub, a threat to America's economic competitiveness in the global marketplace. The US-China tensions we are living through today are indicative of the need to protect America's economic security and derivatively its military strength, that depend crucially on it maintaining the competitiveness of American firms in strategic global markets. So now I move on. Talk a little bit about this concept of economic security. In 1990, two leading members of the Washington establishment, Admiral Bobby Inman and Daniel F. Burton, published a very important paper in Foreign Affairs claiming that, and I quote, national security can no longer be reviewed exclusively in military terms. Economic security and industrial competitiveness are also vital considerations to America's national security. Their argument was not unique, and its timing was not fortuitous. In fact, the idea that the concept of national security should be extended to embrace what was called economic security emerged in wide-ranging debates among actors in Congress, the administration, and civil society in the late 1980s and early 1990s. Can anybody guess why? Well, of course, it was the rise of Japan. It was the threat to American competitive industries by Japan. They noted the alarming rise of Japan as a major economic power, outcompeting the United States in the semiconductor industry and related chip-based industries like computers. In fact, Japan put 9 out of 11 American semiconductor businesses out of business between 1985 and 1995. Spurred on by Yale historian Paul Kennedy's famous analysis of the rise and fall of great powers, published in 1987, which became a key book used in Congress for understanding what was wrong about America's declining position, it became increasingly clear that the Cold War concept of national security based on military strength was narrow, too narrow. Military power based on ceaseless technological innovation would not assure America's capacity to maintain its superiority in global affairs. It needed to be combined with economic strength to defend key strategic industries from ruthless competitors, including allies like Japan, in global markets. What Samuel Huntington called the competitive state had to develop strategies to sustain technological innovation in dual-use processes and products that were constitutive of the country's industrial base. The state had to get involved and not leave everything to market forces to protect key industries like the semiconductor industry, the computer industry, and special kinds of machine tools, 5-axis machine tools, key industries which made America's superiority, which secured its superiority in a wide range of sectors, military and civil. Laissez-faire was no longer an acceptable technological strategy for the federal government. It had to devise ways to strengthen America's manufacturing base, to facilitate a strong American presence in the market, to ensure that the US was not dependent on foreign supplies of key technologies, and to generate new weapons that would require for it to stay a generation ahead of all its rivals. China's ambition to be the top manufacturing power by 2049 challenges directly the competitiveness of American industry in the global space. It challenges national and economic security, and with it Washington's determination to maintain what is called Pax Americana, a global system in which the United States is the most important member of a hierarchical structure maintaining world order. These are the stakes in the confrontation between the Trump administration and China, and they will persist as long as the Chinese Communist Party is determined to challenge the preponderance of American power. So it's about protecting the economic security of the United States, the strength of its manufacturing industry, on which everything else depends, including its global power, both military and economic, from a rival who is determined to displace it. There is no doubt that China is engaged in a range of illegal and legal strategies to accelerate its path to technological self-sufficiency and global dominance. Cyber espionage and economic espionage, the latter used extensively by the Soviet Union, by the way, in the 1970s and early 1980s, are just two of the illegal instruments it uses to secure its objectives. These blatantly illegal strategies are complemented by legal instruments to facilitate transnational scientific and technological transfer. One example, American high-tech firms are acquired by foreign direct investment, by Chinese foreign direct investment in the United States, that secures access to advanced technology. through the back door, if you like. Another, foreign firms are encouraged to invest in China, but on condition that they share their key technologies with them if they want access to the Chinese market. This helps produce, and of course the Foreign Talents Program and academic collaboration are part and parcel of the system. It produces an indigenous strength in trained scientists and engineers who can take advantage of these opportunities to strengthen the whole manufacturing system. So, as I said, the administration has mobilized a range of instruments to limit the circulation of knowledge to both corporations and foreign nationals, notably visitors from China. On the corporate front, as we know, it is engaged in a high visibility conflict with Chinese telecom giant Huawei, mobilizing multinational support to deny 5G technology access to the world market. The president also first stopped and then changed his mind and allowed several American firms from selling core components to Huawei. Huawei depends on a global stream. About 18 American companies supply Huawei with some of its key technologies. Trump originally stopped them trading with Huawei and then stepped back when they protested. He's also energized something called the Committee on Foreign Investment in the US, the CFIUS, enhancing its powers to deny foreign firms backdoor access to sensitive technology and know-how by acquiring major shares in American high-tech industry. So if you're a Chinese entrepreneur and you want to buy an American high-tech industry today, you'll fall foul of something called CFIUS, Committee on Foreign Investment in the United States, that will probably deny you access to that company to stop you having access to the technology that the company develops. And a new law just passed a couple of months ago, specifically targets the previously uncontrolled transfer of emerging critical and foundational technologies to foreign companies. It's called the Foreign Investment Risk Review Modernization Act of August 2018. More and more instruments are being added to impede China from having access to American technology through corporate instruments, through corporate means, or through academic means. A wide range of measures have also been taken in the academic realm to stop China having access to sensitive, important technology. This is never classical, this is not classified information. This is information that would be normally and routinely shared in international scientific exchange with Chinese visitors. So here is a list of key measures. Some of them I mentioned before. Oh gosh, a bit small. Firstly, it has limited the duration of visas for graduate students from China in 3 key fields: robotics, aviation, and high-tech manufacturing. All of these fields are actually targeted in Made in China 2025. Whereas generally foreign students to the United States had 5-year visas, under Obama they had 5-year visas, now they have a 1-year visa renewable if they go in for robotics, aviation, or high-tech manufacturing. Of course, Trump himself, in order to has actually encouraged Chinese students to come to the United States if they stay, which is another way of denying them access to China by offering them the smart person's waiver. But that hasn't been turned into policy yet. Another one is that in a nationwide campaign, I mentioned this earlier, blanketing over 10,000 institutions, the National Institute of Health has indicted researchers, many of them US citizens of Chinese origin, for failing to disclose external sources of support for work conducted with federal research dollars, and notably with support for working with the 1,000 Talents program. The administration has also thought about, but not implemented, an idea that anyone who has worked with 1,000 Talents program will no longer be eligible for federal funding for their research. So it will basically deny them the possibility of doing any further work on federal grants. They can still get corporate grants, but of course the NIH is mostly federal grant. It's the biggest single supporter of federal research in the country. That has not been turned into policy yet, but the threat is hanging over people. They've also created a climate in which non-state actors, that's where we are. They've also created a climate in which non-state actors collaborate in new ways to reinforce controls on circulation of knowledge to China. For example, MIT, just a few months ago, announced that any faculty that submitted a grant application would have that grant application vetted first for what it was called elevated risk, related to intellectual property, export controls, data security, and economic competitiveness and national security. And as you probably know, in addition, in May 2019, that's the last one, America's largest technical professional society, the IEEE, which is a very prestigious engineering institution with a multitude of very prestigious journals, banned scientists employed by Huawei on their review panels to review any new work submitted to the journal for publication. There was an international outcry, and they had to step down under international pressure. So they're doing a lot. The challenge facing the Trump administration, in fact the challenge that will face any American administration, is immense. What China seeks above all is basic or fundamental knowledge and know-how on emerging technologies that would enhance the quality and efficiency of its manufacturing processes in strategic areas. The US research system, and academia in particular, is at the heart of this system of knowledge production and circulation. Basic or fundamental knowledge and know-how that are not classified are routinely and legally transformed in normal face-to-face interactions in laboratories all over the country, including in this one here in Vancouver. It is one thing to punish the Chinese for illegal behavior. It is far more difficult, and that's the real challenge, to control the legal transfer of information in educational environments through face-to-face interaction between graduate students and their faculty. And of course between researchers who go abroad and just share their knowledge with people in China. To justify controls of this kind of exchange, the administration is having to resort to a very expansive concept of what counts as theft. What counts as theft when you just have ordinary exchanges between people that you find in any academic institution? Well, again, the National Institute of Health is ahead here. Lawrence Tabak, the principal deputy director of the NIH, has actually gone as far as to say that pre-patented medical research is the antecedent to creating intellectual property. In essence, what you're doing is stealing other people's ideas. When you do pre-patented research, what Tabak is doing is dissolving the fundamental difference to academic freedom between basic and applied research that is available to everyone, research that is freely available and published, to research that is subject to IP controls and other regulations, and therefore information that is legally shared from information that is illegally shared. By collapsing, by claiming that pre-patented medical research is already, if shared, effectively being stolen by others, he's eliding all of these key divisions which make academic research possible and make fundamental research possible and exchanging of information of that kind legal. Tabak is also opening the door to a number of dubious practices of government overreach. The American Council of Civil Liberties has pointed out, for example, that the case against Chao Chang-chi, with whom I started this story, was built by the government by secretly using, I quote, some of its most powerful spying tools to listen in on his phone calls and read through his emails. Some of this surveillance was authorized by something called the Secret Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court, based on allegations contained in the criminal indictment against Xi. The criminal indictment, in fact, has been proven to be totally mistaken. The FBI, reading his emails, misunderstood what information he was sharing with Chinese colleagues. It wasn't about the pocket heater at all. It was about other kinds of technologies that he worked on 10 or 15 years before. So the case was totally dropped against him subsequently. But still the damage was, of course, done for him. For the government, these surveillance measures are necessary to protect America's military and economic security from an unscrupulous competitor. This is just collateral damage. For many in academia, they are a gross overreaction to a problem that is real, but of limited extent. In fact, to date, economic espionage in major corporations has been a far more lucrative source of sensitive technology for the Chinese government, as far as we know, than has the loss of information through academic research and exchange. So I'm going to conclude now. The confrontational posture of the Trump administration to international collaboration with China shouldn't blind us to the very real threats in the long term that it is seeking to thwart. By a strange twist of fate, the globalization of the world economy and the international circulation of financial and highly trained human capital is producing an illiberal, techno-national, protectionist backlash in the name of economic and military security. The countries in the capitalist West are not only competing among themselves for increasing shares of the world market, they're competing together against a formidable ideological, industrial, and technological rival for world market domination. Trade wars are not only about steel and soya beans. More fundamentally, I'm an historian of technology and science, they are about controlling the international circulation and appropriation of cutting-edge emerging technologies and the related know-how and knowledge that goes with them. Embedded in manufacturing systems, these will define the international distribution of economic and political power in the mid-21st century. For the Trump administration, China is an economic enemy and an existential threat to national military and economic security that must be met head-on by combining assertive nationalism and economic protectionism with restrictions on academic freedom. For his opponents in the United States, China does not have the means or the credibility to replace America as a global superpower. It is not seeking to overturn an economic world order from which it has gained so much. It is best dealt with, his opponents say, by engaging China in the world capitalist system and gradually letting it adjust itself to the international norms which shape that international system. There is no knowing whether the Trump administration's approach will prevail or whether the liberal internationalist approach will prevail. But then it is safe to say that the apocryphal Chinese curse, may you live in interesting times, has settled upon us. Thank you.